Today, I'm very happy and delighted to invite Dyci Sfregola to join my podcast. When I first met Dyci, what really struck me was the combination of competency and warmth. And that's not something, it's interesting. It's on the one hand, it's not something that you typically find in great leadership. On the other hand, I'm finding it more and more common in the people that I am interviewing for this podcast. So Dyci is the founder of New Gen Architects, a digital supply chain consultancy that helps manufacturers, industrialized construction firms, and supply chain leaders implement technology and planning automation solutions, optimize processes, and upskill their workforce for profitability and sustainable growth. Dyci has worked with global brands and government agencies to drive digital transformation. Welcome, leaders. In a world constantly evolving, true leadership requires resilience, presence, vision, and a willingness to embrace challenge and change. I'm Dr. Sideroff, and this is Quantum Leadership Podcast, where we go beyond conventional leadership to explore the principles that connect mind, body, and organizational success. Dyci, what a pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will have to say, I'm going to have to share that feedback with my husband about competency and warmth. I had a surgery last year, and my husband asked the surgeon, "Did you find a heart in there, or was it just a block of ice?" And I tell him all the time, I'm not cold-hearted. So I must give all of my warmth off to everyone else, and I don't have anything left over for my husband.
I'm sure as a true leader, you learned from that experience, and you, in my language, you bounced forward to do it in a newer and better way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great. Well, Dyci, I would love for you to begin by just telling me a little bit about your story and when you really realized that you could be a leader, and what was that path like for you? What obstacles you encountered and how you overcame them?
I think that it was difficult for me to see myself as a leader. And my story, I actually started in a different field than what I am now, which might have contributed to that obstacle of being able to see myself as a leader. I wouldn't necessarily say imposter syndrome as much as maybe just awareness of lack of experience, lack of wisdom, etc. I think that my traditional perspective of a leader has always been someone with like X years of experience, and they're older and they're wiser, and you equate age and number of years in experience with leadership and wisdom. I started my career in sales and marketing, and then I moved over to industrial engineering, engineering management, and it was a completely different world. I was very much a fish out of water, which is, ultimately you learn that there's the path between knowing, and starting something new, and you kind of always a fish out of water. But I think that it wasn't, a moment when I realized that, hey, I can do this. I'm a leader. It was a series of small points. I think, thinking about it now, I liken it to building trust. Trust isn't built in like these big moments of, one hits or two hits and you tell people everything. It's these little moments of vulnerability where you build trust. And that's very much what it was like for me. I don't think it really clicked, from a leadership perspective until maybe 2022. After I had navigated some challenges to where I say, okay, I've earned my badge of honor. Like I can call myself a leader now, but working up to that was recognizing that I would sit in rooms with people who did have that traditional profile in my mind of being a leader, which basically you've been doing this a long time. If you've been doing this a long time, you get to be a leader. And I was like, oh, I know more than this person. So, you know what I mean? Doing it for a long time doesn't necessarily make you a great leader. It just means that maybe you've been doing that thing for a long time.
Well, I love the things that you've said because you highlight some things I believe are so important in the process of becoming a leader and seeing yourself as a leader. So the first thing you said, which everybody experiences, is I'm over here and leader is over there, or competency is over there. And so there's this sort of gap between where you experience yourself and that ultimate goal or vision. And so that was one thing I'm going to ask you to kind of dive into how you took those first steps. The second thing is you recognize that it's not just automatically getting there, but it's the series of small steps that slowly help us. And so back to the first point, it's that if you take a growth mindset, so it's not like, how do I get from here all the ways to there? It's like, oh, this is a growing process. And then you mentioned vulnerability. So can you just give us a little bit of the detail and granular level of how you got into the engagement of that process to see yourself taking those small steps to get there? And how did vulnerability play a role in that process?
So I think that, when I really got engaged into it and when I really tapped into it is perhaps I have a leadership coach, an executive coach, and she had a retreat and people were telling me, like, you're such a great leader. You're so amazing. You're such a wonderful person. And it's never something that I internalized. And my coach told me there is a point in your life when maybe you should listen to what everyone else is saying, even if you don't, believe it. So I had to start tuning in to what others were saying about me. I had to start tuning in and to how I made others feel. And that's when I realized also the difference between being a leader and being an expert. And they're two different paths. It's not the same thing. And the other, I guess, traditional thought of leader that I had is that this person is an expert. They know everything about this thing. You can go to them for anything. And meeting a lot of experts and starting to interact with other leaders, I became very aware of the fact that it's two different things. All experts are not great leaders. All experts are not leaders in general. They don't see themselves as leaders. And the opposite is true as well. All leaders are not experts in whatever they're doing. The vulnerability, I think, came from being in tune to what others were saying and listening when they were saying, oh, you're so great, or you're so this, or oh, you're so that. And I started to see that there was almost this pedestal. And I think that when I started to engage from that and either say, thank you, I appreciate that, or what makes you say that? Why do you think that way? And then diving into the conversation deeper and even quite frankly saying, it's so crazy that you say I seem so confident because 10 minutes ago, I was huddled in my hotel room having no idea why I was coming to this thing, because this is not my field. This is not my, so I think that being vulnerable with myself, and also accepting you don't have to be the expert. You don't have to know everything in order to be a great leader. And then honestly, reading, I know a lot of my peers who read books about the industry, going toward that expert level, books about, the topic and, building knowledge. And I was starting to read books about human behavior and human psychology and how can you make connection with people? How can you help people? How can you make people feel important? When I became more in tuned and engaged with that side of becoming a leader, I started to also believe that I was a leader despite not having the quote unquote expertise that I, would think that someone else might expect me to have.
Beautiful. I love how you recognize the difference between being an expert and being a leader. And I want to step back and highlight some of the things that you just said, Dyci, because first of all, you talked about being in a group where you were getting certain kind of feedback. And that highlights how important it is for people who want to be leaders or people who want to be expert, in fact, to make sure that we put ourselves in the right environment where we can get that kind of feedback. We can get that kind of validation where we can be in an environment where people can recognize our uniqueness, our specialness, and then to reflect that back to us. So right off the start, that's important. Secondly, I tell people that I work with all the time that it's not enough to accomplish. It's not enough to master a skill. What really makes the difference is a separate process of owning that, of taking it in. And it does involve being vulnerable. In fact, as you just highlighted, vulnerable with ourselves to take in something. This is how we close the gap between who we see it we are and who we want to be, or how we demonstrate skills and abilities that can actually indicate that we are further along than we see ourselves. This is part of the neuroplastic growth process. And I want to make one other comment before we continue, because you highlighted the notion of connection and the importance of connection. And I was just listening to a podcast, actually, in which they talked about the key components, the key values of our hunter-gatherer ancestors. And why this is important is because we've evolved from them and we continue to carry the instincts that serve them well. And connection was one of the two key components that really served hunter-gatherers and continue to serve us being able to connect. And so in your description, the first steps of your description of leadership, you are pointing to the importance of connection. And so I'm hearing that is one of the things that distinguishes being an expert from being a leader. Would you agree? And can you expand on that?
No, I definitely agree. And I would say it's connection, and I've heard it called servant leadership, but ultimately for me, I always think about what I can do to help others. And I've also heard this called reciprocity. Like there are different frameworks and different, sociological, theories behind it. But essentially, I think that if I set out to help people, genuinely helping people, whether that is someone that I report to, whether that's a client, whether that's someone that reports to me, then that energy will come back to me. And I have found that in genuinely helping people, so that growth mindset, you learn a lot. And by offering the help from a sincere, genuine, internal perspective, not expecting that you're going to get something out of it immediately, not looking to, take advantage of someone in their situation, but that creates connection. When someone feels like you genuinely want to help them, whether that's just listening, because they've had a bad day, whether that's listening because they've had a great day, and genuinely being interested in people, not what's the weather like? Or, how was your weekend? I have made it a point to answer honestly. If someone asks me, how are you? I always have an honest. I never just say I'm good. unless I'm actually good. If I'm actually good, then I'll say, things are going really well. I'll use a lot of times, all my problems have solutions. So I'm not going to let it get me down. Or I'll say, what, things aren't that great, but I don't want to talk about it right now. It's not going to affect the way, we handle this meeting. And I think that those little points of connection, what I talked about earlier, building trust and being vulnerable, you take off this facade that as a leader, you've got to have all the right answers. You've got to show up all the time. You've got to be this way all the time. You've got to be on it. All the T's are crossed, all the I's are dotted. And the craziest thing is, going back to what you were saying also about, that group and having people validate your feelings, whether they're positive or challenging. When you share, you know what, I'm not doing that great. And someone else says, you know what, I'm not doing that great either. And you not only create that connection, you've not only built trust, but you are also not living in this bubble where your problems and your challenges are compounded because you think they're only happening to you. I'm floundering. I can't figure this out. I'm obviously not as good as what I thought I was. I obviously shouldn't be in this role. I obviously shouldn't be doing this thing. And then you talk to, two other colleagues and like, oh no, we're all mucking it up. Like we're all trying to figure it out. No one's got it figured out. So you need the validation to say, yes, you're great. But also when you're not great, you're not alone.
Beautifully said. And I like to say that one of the keys to leadership, and I have my own definition of integrity. To me, integrity, or one aspect of integrity, is when the inner person that we see as ourselves is the same or matches as closely what we share with the outside world. And that's not really what happens with most people. Most people want to hide their vulnerability. They want to hide their weaknesses. They want to hide what they see as their shortcomings. And so what most people wind up doing is creating this mask or image to the outside world that we think people want to see. And what the problem with that is that we're always, at least a little bit, whether it's conscious or unconscious, worrying about whether that inner person is going to somehow leak out. We're going to stumble and people are going to see what we don't want them to see. And this creates a lot of stress, a lot of tension. And I believe that it's a very important aspect of what leads to burnout. So the more we are willing to share our vulnerabilities, as you're talking about, the more resilient we stay because we're not worried about that disconnect and worried about the judgments as worried about the judgments of others.
And I can say, processing that, listening to what you just said, I have experienced burnout, and I can say that part of what contributed to the burnout was likely trying to put up that face to the outside. I'm always on time. I always do this. I never make mistakes. I always submit things when I'm supposed to. I'm always smiling. I'm always happy. I'm always being the best for everyone else, and always putting that out to it's exhausting to try to maintain because it's also unrealistic, trying to compartmentalize. Well, this other thing is happening and, I can't let it seep in, and I can't let people see that I'm human. I can't be affected by my personal life. I can't have children and be a mother and, be a wife and also be a business leader like that. That's not a thing. And when I finally accepted or intentionally decided, I'm going to be who I'm going to be, and people are going to like me or they're not going to like me, and they're going to work with me or they're not going to work with me. And going back to a conversation with my coach, we didn't have that specific conversation, but I had writer's block when I was trying to get my book done. And she said, well, why are you writing this book? Who are you writing it for? And having that conversation with her helped me realize that I was having writer's block because is it going to be good enough? Is everybody going to like it? Is everyone going to give 5-star reviews? Is everyone going to have something good to say? And then I realized I'm not writing the book for everyone to like it. That's not, so why do I care? I don't care if everyone gives it a 5-star review. That's not what I'm writing it. I'm not writing it for the reviews. I'm not writing it for the likes. And, really internalizing that and taking it into other parts of just being me and being, I don't have to be liked by everyone. I don't have to work with everyone. And do I want to work with people that expect you to be a robot? Do I want to work with people that expect you to always be on, always be good, all the time? Or do I want to work with people who look out for each other? To where if I say, you know what, it's not a great day, but let's get through this. And I want them to feel okay saying, you know what, my cat that I've had for 15 years, I had to put her down and I'm not emotionally in the place to be able to show up right now. I've had people cancel meetings and say, you know what, I'm just exhausted. And I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste my time. And I remember posting about it on LinkedIn, one specific instance. And I said, you know what? The haters will say that the new generation is soft. You know what I mean? Like, we're too soft. And I think, no, we're just human. We recognize that ultimately it's all about taking care of each other. And, you were talking about hunter-gatherer, just like natural human instinct. And I studied a little bit of anthropology too. So there are things that I think are just natural human points of existing in the world that we've lost sight of. And now saying, all right, let's bring this back into just the human experience. Like, you have to work as part of human experience, but we also make children and we also have highs and we have lows, and it's all connected, and it's not realistic to expect people to compartmentalize. And I think that's part of being recognizing that, but also really executing on that is, I think, a really great part of leadership that I've seen in others that I emulate, and the ones that I have seen that don't, go by that path. I just always consciously say, I never want to be that person, and I don't want to work with that person either.
You are expressing, there are a bunch of nuggets in what you've just said, and I want to kind of identify some of them because, first of all, a lot of us get stuck, whether it's going into a meeting, having a conversation with somebody where we're concerned about how they're going to judge us. And this creates anxiety, it creates tentativeness, and it certainly creates a lot of stress. And what you're talking about is how I describe how so many of us are grounded outside of ourselves. The ground is other people's values. The ground is what other people think, the other people's judgments. And as soon as we put that grounding out there, we lose our center, so to speak. We lose who we are, and we cannot be at our best when we do that. So reversing that and being grounded here, where you share exactly where you're at rather than worrying about what other people are going to think or say, is really a beautiful shift from transactional relationships that we find so much in organizations and companies, and quite frankly, from leaders. So here we are emphasizing what it takes to be next level leadership. And what you're pointing out is being grounded here. What you're pointing out is the importance of genuine, authentic relationships, and how that not only helps you ultimately, but it helps all the people around you. And so here we see a model of leadership that raises everybody else around you as well.
I think that a lot of, thinking about leaders, thinking about what you just said, when I was really able to balance it and thinking about one of the clicks that I mentioned, there were multiple little tiny moments of clicks. But if I think about one moment is, when there were a couple of companies that had reached out about acquiring my company, or doing a strategic investment. And I was talking to people like, oh, well, you could be X, growth in this company. You just have to do this, you have to do that, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was very much looking for validation, like you say, outside of my center. What did everyone else, what was society telling me leadership looks like? What was society telling me success looked like? And in my mind, that was raising $300 million, creating a unicorn and being on the cover of Forbes, or that was becoming an executive at a multinational enterprise, still on the way to the cover of Forbes, but all paths leads to the cover of Forbes. Like, that is success. That is leadership. That's who you that's who you have to emulate. And I went to I think it was like a cocktail reception or something for an organization called Corliss. And there was a woman there who, I think she'd taken 2 or 3 companies public, and, she had all this experience. And she said, you can make your leadership path and your business path whatever you want it to be. You don't have to X growth anything. You don't have to be on the cover of anybody's anything. And I listened to a podcast. I cannot remember the name of it, but there was a woman who was saying that she really wanted to be Forbes 30 under 30. And she wanted to be Forbes 30 under 30. And she realized that to get on Forbes 30 under 30 list, I always thought it was this, this list of people where the editors are really scouring the internet and scouring all of businesses to find the best leaders. And then someone said, no, you just have to have a good PR team. And I was like, what? That can't be right. No, it's not just that someone has to know about you. You have to actually be doing stuff. And this woman was saying that basically someone from the previous year nominated her, and she just text and say, hey, I heard that this is kind of nomination based. Will you nominate me? And they said, yes, of course. So then she got nominated, and then she was on Forbes 30 under 30. And she said, you know what changed in my life? Nothing. For a day, people sent me a bunch of congratulatory emails. And that was it. It didn't validate that I'm good at what I do. It didn't validate anything. So the more you look for this external validation that continues to change as society changes, as our values as a society change, that's always going to continue to change. So you have to be grounded in yourself, because then you get these little moments of external validation, and it's like, no, okay, that would nothing happened, nothing changed. So that's kind of going back to what you're saying, a growth mindset. Some people say, enjoy the journey, don't just always go for the end goal. I remember sitting in a meeting maybe about a year ago, if that. And I said, I want to be COO of this type of company. I want it to be global. I want to speak in multiple languages. Then I will have made it. Then I'll be a leader, and that's going to be success. And that's when I can say, and I got the title, and I'm sitting in the meeting with the Georgia Economic Development Director and our CEO, and our investors are called in for internationally. And I realized this is the moment that I said, that was going to be it. That was the pinnacle of my success. I'm now a leader. This is everything I've always wanted. And the first thing I thought was, well, I'm only 35. So I have the rest of life to go. So this can't, what do I do now? This can't be the end of it. And then I also thought, well, this is underwhelming. There are so many things I'd rather be doing than what I'm doing right now. Sitting in this meeting in what feels like this big wig leadership thing. That's not Why did I think that was the case? Because I was looking for external validation. Somebody else said the title is important. Somebody else said that, it's international and multi, and somebody else said these things. So I was looking for all this external validation to be able to say, I'm successful, I'm a leader. And then I had to sit down and really reflect on, what the woman from Corliss said. This is your path. You make it whatever you want to make it. And it might change because life changes, circumstances change, it will ebb and flow. And I think once you accept that internally, it's much easier to just show up and be okay with who you are, even in the moments when it's like, what am I doing here? Why did I accept this? And then you have to tell yourself, you're just in the learning. You just started. It's going to be fine. You can't be an expert today. And then you have to just woosah and stick with it. But it even makes those moments where you're not the expert, where you're very much an amateur. And you separate that from your ability to lead. You separate that from your ability to show up because you know who you are and you're grounded and confident in that.
Beautiful. Beautifully well said. It reminds me of my model of resilience. And the first pillar of resilience is our relationship with ourselves. And so much of our relationship with ourselves and our identity, in fact, is derived from the lessons and conditioning of childhood. And I remember one of the approaches that I do in my clinical work is called Gestalt therapy. And one of the founders, Fritz Perls, would say, when you're a child, you swallow all of these lessons, but you just swallow them whole. You don't analyze, you're too young to. You don't determine if it's right or not. You just swallow them all. And most of us live our lives based on those lessons that we swallowed. And he was saying that the real key to life is bringing those lessons up and chewing on them. And if they don't taste right, you spit them out. But some of them may fit, but you want to create your own lessons based on your own experience, based on your own learning. So back to the example you just gave us, it's not that the step that you took and being in that meeting, in that important, powerful meeting, and acknowledging how you reached that level, that's great. But we're talking about how we frame it. It doesn't have to be the be-all, end-all. It could be just part of your journey, and it's a step in your journey. And, it goes to the heart of what I consider to be a good leader. A leader is not someone who looks around to see what other people are doing and says, that's what I'm going to get as good as them. I'm going to reach that level that they've reached. A leader, if you think about the leader's out in front. The leader is setting the example. The leader is determining what's important based on their own experience and from their place of grounding. So it sounds like there was a moment right there where you were making that reframe, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I had to reframe because what I recognized is that I was always going for these arbitrary milestones. And I'll say they're arbitrary because it was nothing that if I look back and say like, hey, this is what I want, it was what I thought somebody else expected me to do. So there were these milestones, but those expectations are also very much based off of the bell curve. I would say statistically, if you take 100 people, then X number of them will do this, X percentage will do this. Like in the middle, this is, so now I'm going to put you in the middle. This is what I would expect from you, as opposed to saying, you know what? I think that the moment I said, how am I going to help make the world a better place? And that sounds like very much like, okay, where is this going? Like maybe kind of try, maybe kind of like, okay, Mother Teresa, but almost like, what's the purpose? Like what are you even doing all of this for? Sure, you're in the powerful meeting. You're the decision maker. And what? So what? You got invited. They want you to speak. They want you to say these things. Okay, and so what? It came down to and like, what's the purpose? What are you actually doing to help further society? What are you actually doing to help other people? And when you find that purpose, it's easier almost to go on the path, to remain resilient, because even, oh my goodness, someone said, don't focus on the content, focus on the context. The powerful meeting is the content. The title is the content. What's the context? What are you trying to do with all of these things? If you focus on the context, it's easier to not be so focused on the content and let those content pieces validate you. But it's also easier to be more at least I have found that in part. And I'm thinking back to the things that I learned from reading the 9 pillars, of resilience, and the things that I remember from that, and the little nuggets that I took away from it that always stick with me. And when I'm in that moment that feels like this is so stressful, my cortisol levels are high, and I have to say, this is not life or death. Like, this is not life or death. Like, come on, natural human response. I get it. We're not there. I'm doing my breathing. But I also recognize that the moments where that stress is higher is we're like, well, this is not going to help me achieve that thing. And this is not going to help me get to that milestone. This interruption, there's no way. So like you do feel like everything is at risk. You feel like, but if you think about, I don't know, this is like, if I think about the context though, this is an inconvenience, but it's not stressful. Like I'm not going to die from it. You know what I mean? Like there's my well-being is not like, to the 9 pillars. I ask my question, ask myself the 9 pillars of resilience. Do I have food? Do I have shelter? Do I have water? Is my family happy? Am I healthy? Like none of these things that might be not exactly the content that I want, none of them are affecting the context. The ultimate context from here until hopefully I've got 50, 60 more years left. From today to the next 50 or 60 years, this one moment is not going to affect that. Now, if I were saying, I need to be the COO, I need to be the SVP, I need to be the VP, and if I don't do this and I'm not going to get that, then yeah, it might be a little bit more stressful because I'm focused on that one little thing.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I appreciate you bringing in the 9 pillars of resilience, because I see resilience as part of the foundation of a healthy and progressive leader. You have to be able to do a good job of taking care of yourself in order to take care of anybody under your leadership. And then the one point that you made here is that so much of the time we quickly go into survival mode, as you just pointed out. And the more we're in survival mode, the more stress takes a toll on us. And I really appreciate how you made that shift. And sometimes a small shift in perspective. No, my life doesn't depend on this. Makes a big difference in how your body metabolizes the experience so that it is not as stressful or impactful on our bodies. But the other point you raised, and I think one of the goals of this podcast is to expand the concept of leadership. And you expressed that in a few really beautiful ways. And you talked about purpose and how important that was in that part of your journey where you talked about your purpose and what is my purpose. And I think purpose and vision are such an important part of being a leader. And it's what helps us really break out of a box, think outside the box, because we are looking way ahead. It's not that we're not grounded here, but we also want to have that vision of the direction we're going in and a reason for why we're doing what we do.
Absolutely. I tell my husband all the time, he's an artist. So maybe it's an artist thing. I don't know. He always said, "You can't understand. You're an engineer." And I was like, "Okay, I'm still a human, but but I tell him all the time, you have to have a vision. You don't go to the building material store and just buy a bunch of stuff and hope that you end up with a house. You at least have to have an idea of what you want the house to look like so you know what material to get. GPS. So you don't just get in the car and start driving and hope you don't run out of gas. You put in a destination and you might recalculate because you miss a turn or the road is blocked and the GPS didn't know. But ultimately, you know how much gas you need to get there. You can recalibrate. And then, especially from leadership, and you said earlier, I actually wrote it down. It's vision and willingness to embrace change. So you have to know where you're going. And as trite as it sounds, the only thing constant is change. And it's even more so pronounced as technology. Data is going faster exponentially than ever in human history. Technology is changing faster than ever in human history. And those sorts of things affect not only the way we move in business, but just in our personal lives. I mean, every year there's a new version of something, and you have to choose what to keep up with, what not to keep up with. We're constantly shifting that paradigm. And going back to what you were saying, as when you're a child, like you set the schema in your mind, and then you get new information, and then you change your schema of like what the world is, and you get new information, you change it for what the world is. And I think we have to remain like that. And change sucks, man. Like it sucks. You get into a routine, those neural pathways are just going. Like it's easy to just keep doing the same thing, but growth is in the pain. Like you hate to say it, but that's true. If you want to learn how to be a great leader in crisis, you have to lead in crisis. If you want to learn how to be resilient during a challenging time, you have to live during a challenging time and try different stress management techniques and see what works for you. It sucks. In the moment, it sucks, but you have to live through the sucky part to realize, what type of leader am I? How I saw those people I like, I saw the people I didn't like, but what's me? Who am I? In this, what works for me, what doesn't work for me. And even that is constantly changing, because as circumstances we can't control change, the way that we see the world will change if we are being good leaders. If we're stuck in our ways and like, it's just always going to be this, I don't care, I'm going to stick my head in the sand and pretend like none of this exists. I mean, that is an option. It's not an option. It's not a great option, but people do it.
I will highlight two patterns that are two of the most powerful that we have. On the one hand, we have this tremendous capacity to learn and become conditioned to certain patterns. And that's helpful because, when we first are growing up, we learn how to walk. And when we're learning how to walk, every step we have to think about, we have to pay attention to. But very quickly, it becomes procedural memory. It becomes automatic. And we could think about all levels of conditioning where that same thing happens. And that allows us to go to the next level. So we learn, and then it becomes a conditioned pattern where we don't think about it. But because it's conditioned and we don't think about it, we keep doing the same things over and over again. So that's the conditioning process. That's the lessons of childhood. Now, the other very powerful process that we have is neuroplasticity, which is to learn new things. And how do we balance these two things out? And we have to be open and willing to take in new information and be willing to challenge all of our beliefs to help us grow. Now, one thing I would like to maybe shift a little bit, when when you talk about challenge and learning new things as sucky, I would say that what would be great for everybody is to embrace that. Embrace that notion that doing new things actually helps us grow. And so let me embrace that, not have the perspective that, oh, do I have to learn that? But yeah, I want to learn that. That just grows my capacity.
I get to do this thing. Yeah, I try to tell myself that during a lot of times, but sometimes I'm just like, this really sucks. But I know it's not going to suck in the end, but it really sucks right now. But you know what I do? And it's funny because I was talking to a girlfriend a couple of weeks ago. And she's like, we should do a book club. And I was like, yeah, right now I'm reading, this book. And she said, you read full-length books in Spanish? And I said, yeah. I mean, like the first one was hard, but if you keep doing it, you start to get, she said, that's really great. You read full-length books in, foreign languages. And I said, yeah, look, I just finished this puzzle, but they forgot 2 pieces. So I have to contact the manufacturer to get the 2 pieces. And she said, you do thousands. I sent her the picture and she said, you do 1,000-piece puzzles in your spare time. And I'd never thought about it, but I consciously, intentionally said, I want to do this thing because if you do quote unquote hard things normally, or things that seem hard, things that seem impossible, and maybe it's also like specifically my line of work, I feel like there's always it's one thing, but it's connected in the system to so many other things. So it's actually huge. And it always feels like when we sit down in a conference room, or if we sit down on a call, and it always feels like we shouldn't even try. It's too hard. It's too hard. We're not going to get there. But doing the 1,000-piece puzzle and looking at all of the random pieces that don't mean anything. And I say, you know what? Guess I better start organizing them. Like I know that eventually I get to see. So I take that everywhere. If you do new things enough, then I think doing the new thing is the conditioning to just being accustomed to change. I started riding horses, and then I started training horses. And every single moment where I say or think, this is too hard, I'm not going to do this, I can think about, well, it took me a month, but I did the puzzle. And it took me a year and a half when I was hoping it would only take me 3 months, but now I can do this with my horse. And whenever I sit down in front of something that seems impossible, I always say, well, you know what? Just start with a small piece. Because remember that time you did this? Remember that time that this seemed hard? Remember this time that this seemed... So if you do enough of it, then it gets to the point to where you're conditioned to say, and you also have the evidence. Evidence says you can do it. So I know I can do it because I intentionally look for things like that. It's almost kind of masochism. I don't know.
Well, I wouldn't call it masochism. Actually, there's a saying, easy choice, difficult life. Difficult choice is easy life. And what you're describing is I take the difficult choice path, and it makes your life overall easier because you get more and more comfortable doing the uncomfortable, so to speak. And that's great. I'm aware of our time, Dyci, and before we have to close, I'd like to talk about the company New Gen Architects that you founded in 2020. And maybe you could just say a little bit about the biggest challenge or challenges you had there, and that demonstrate your leadership qualities and what those qualities might be.
No, that's such a great question. And I'm not going to think too hard about it. I'm just going to go with knee jerk because I feel like that's probably like if it came out as an emotional response, then it probably like really stuck with me as a difficult challenge. So the company started off very well, like struck when the iron was hot. I was doing digital supply chain at the height of COVID when everyone was trying to figure out what the supply chain problems were. Everyone was trying to figure out what the technology solutions were. Everyone was at home. They needed to get to the cloud. I mean, it was the perfect time to be a digital supply chain advisor. And I grew the team very fast to keep up with all of the demand for business that was coming in. And I was, we did 7 figures year one, 40% year over year growth. Like we were really, really, really trucking. And then inflation hit and the cash dried up. And economic factor after economic factor after economic factor hit. And I had to really sit down and figure out, what does cash flow look like? Where do we continue to invest? Who do we have to say, we're not renewing your contract? Who do we have to say, I'm going to help you find another role? I don't feel great about like layoffs. You have to go, but like, it's coming. I'm telling you, it's coming. It doesn't look great. Let's start looking at your resume together. Let's start figuring out what's going to be the next step. And that felt like the largest failure. I mean, it was challenging getting through it to begin with, because when I started the company, I never started the company. I wanted to be a contractor so that I could work part-time, stay at home with my son, spend more family time. And I was hoping to replace my salary with a couple of part-time gigs. That was my expectation. Things grew very, very quickly, very, very fast. So it was challenging to go through that because I quite frankly didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't planning to have a company. So I wasn't planning to hire employees. So I hadn't thought about labor compliance. I hadn't thought about this state versus that state. I hadn't thought about tax structure. I hadn't thought about so many things. I hadn't thought about what it looks like to be a leader and to hire people and to onboard people. And it was very much me saying, okay, this is what I think it should look like. This is what I experienced, but it was very challenging. We call them champagne problems. Like, who cares? You're growing, like who cares? But it was very challenging going through that. And I was nursing full time. I still had a young kid. So, I was going through that. And it was also COVID. My husband is Italian. I married him in Italy. When we lived in Italy, Italy was hit very hard by COVID. So emotionally, he was always there. He was reading the news all the time, talking to his parents all the time. You couldn't go out of the house. You couldn't get away from it. So just the air in the home was not great. So it was very challenging to deal with that. And then it seems like it went down as quickly as it went up when all of the economic changes happened. So working through that was on the way up challenging, on the way down challenging, felt like failure, fear of failure, going through worst case scenario, got a therapist, burnt out a couple of times. And looking back at it now, how lucky was I to have all of those learning opportunities in such a small time? I mean, like I got an MBA. I didn't get an MBA, but I got an MBA. I got an MBA. I think the best way to get an MBA is to just do business. I got an MBA through life, the School of Hard Knocks. I learned how to be resilient and communicative in my relationship. I learned what I was looking for in life personally. I made some mistakes that I now have the wisdom, and I advise, other startup leaders. This is where I went wrong. You might want to consider this before you make a final decision. I never tell people what they should do because they have to live with the decision, not me. Everyone has to make the decision that they should. I always say, make the decision you don't regret. So if I look back on it, I don't regret any decision that I made because I made the decision with the information that I had at the time. Now, just seeing how that played out, hindsight's 2020, you can always say shoulda, woulda, coulda, but it was rough, man. I would say from starting the business, until maybe summer of last year. It was rough because going up was rough, coming down was rough. And then figuring out like it went this. So figuring out where this is, that was very challenging.
So, Dyci, what would you attribute? What qualities of yourself or what attributes of yourself can you attribute your success and tackling all of these, having burnouts and getting beyond the burnouts and, getting through all of these struggles? What is it that you either had or you adopted or you learned that served you the most in this difficult path that you just described?
Asking for help, but also having the discernment to ask the right person. So building the relationships of people who were aligned with me spiritually, ethically, morally, somewhat even financially, people that you can build relationships with, build that trust to say, look, this bill is coming up. I got to pay this, but I got payroll, but I have this, but I have that. There's so much that we're taught. Like, don't talk about your money, don't share it with other people, but you can't do anything alone. You can't get through any of it alone. So asking for help in every aspect, like telling my husband, I can't do this, telling my parents, I need help, going to therapy and I had a friend who had a practice and I say, I need you, you know me, you know my situation. I need you to pair me with a therapist. I need you to make the recommendation because I don't have time. I don't have the energy, the mental capacity to sit down and try to find my own. I asked for help. And I realized I couldn't do it alone and that I didn't have to and that I shouldn't. And I think that's one of the other things that we think of as leaders, because there's one person on the cover of Forbes. There's not, their therapist isn't on Forbes, their life coach isn't on Forbes, their personal trainer isn't on the cover, their friends aren't on the cover, like their community, their support system isn't on the cover. So you think, if this person can do it, I can do it. But that person isn't a person. That person has a whole team. They have a whole community. So that is the one, if I had to call it a value, I guess maybe not being prideful, and just saying hey, vulnerability, I need this. I can't move forward without it. I need you specifically. I can't move forward without you. I think just that's what got me through it.
Beautiful. And of course, you brought up vulnerability once again. And, just recently I wrote an article really based on the lessons of the Super Bowl victory. And I talked about what the head coaches of both teams said and the quarterbacks of both teams said. And every single one of them talked about, I couldn't do it alone. It required a team effort. It required me to literally rely on others. And those were the biggest takeaways from the Super Bowl victory. And you're emphasizing the same kinds of things. Now, I think that's great. And I love how that's being reinforced here. If you were to go to another quality of yours, a second one, as we're winding down here, what would you identify within yourself or what you developed within yourself?
I think maybe trust. And when I say trust, I honestly strictly mean trusting myself. Maybe that's a little bit of confidence in my, who I am, confidence in who I can be, trusting the process, but really just letting go of control. There's so much that I've always tried to control, or I always tried to control. And they even in sales, you read a book, it's a numbers game. If you talk to this number of people, you'll definitely close. So you start to get into this false sense of control. If I do this, this will happen. And you start to realize in my journey of stress management and trying to become better at not going into this must survive, must get everything done, it's so urgent, trying to move away from that, I really started to write down, what am I stressed about? what am I anxious about? What is causing this pit in my stomach? Why am I always living with this pit in my stomach? Why am I always short on breath? Like I'll realize I'll do this because I've been holding my breath. I didn't realize I was holding, like, what am I holding my breath? Why am I doing this? And I started to write down like what the thoughts were that were causing it. And then I started to say, what can I control? What can I influence? What is literally out of my hands? I cannot influence it. I cannot control it. I remember one time writing a list of like 8 things that were going through my mind, and I can control 2 things. So I had to start to learn to trust that I know how to handle those 2 things. I am equipped. I have everything I need to handle those 2 things. The other things that I can influence, I'm also equipped to try to shift them in my direction, positively as much as possible. But the other things that I can't control, I have to trust that whatever I'm doing is going to get me to where I would like to be. And if it doesn't get me there, that once we get to wherever it does get me, that I have the tool set and I have the experience and I have the expertise to be able to manage the situation at that point. But I can't try to think about it now because it doesn't matter. I can think of 50 different scenarios that none of them will happen and 51 will happen. I didn't even think of it. So it doesn't make sense to try. So I think just trust that I am good at what I do and can control what I can control. And then anything that I can't control, I'm still good enough to be able to manage it when it comes.
Beautiful. So well said. And I love all of the topics that we've touched on during this hour conversation, Dyci. They all are in alignment with really next level leadership. And they are also in alignment with my 9 pillars of resilience. You talk about trust, and one of the keys there is trust is not something that you're born with. You develop trust through taking small steps, taking small risks, and then looking back and recognizing the steps that you took and how successful they were. So you literally grow the trust in yourself. So I really appreciate that. And when you talk about control, and most times, most people want to be so much in control that we're out of control, because real control occurs when you let go. Real control occurs when you let go of the things that are not within your control and don't waste your energy focusing on that, worrying about that, because that is using up precious energy, and we don't have unlimited amounts of energy. And so that's part of avoiding burnout in any walk of life, in anything you're doing. So beautiful lessons, and I really appreciate how you tie them to your personal experience, because it shows the audience that these are real implementing ideas that we can all take and run with. So thank you so much, Dyci. I really appreciate everything we've talked about today.
No, I do too. It was a great conversation to also, for me, really reflect, on what I've learned, to try to share as much wisdom and my experience. So I appreciate the opportunity. It was a great conversation.
Great. Thank you so much. And we'll do this again because you have so much valuable information for our audience. So again, thank you, Dyci.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining me on this Quantum Leadership podcast. I hope today's conversation has inspired you to think bigger, lead more authentically, and take steps toward meaningful change. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with others and make sure you subscribe and go to my website, drstephensideroff.com. Thank you again.